So hello, everyone. I am Ribicca Mamuye. I am a content creator based in the Pacific Northwest, BECU member. I have Solynn McCurdy here with me, who's a Senior VP of Social Impact at BECU. And today we're going to be having a very meaningful conversation about the work that BECU is doing in regards to racial equity in the state of Washington. So welcome, Solynn. I'm very happy to speak to you today.
Great to be here with you as well. Good to see you.
Great. Okay, so I have a list of questions that I'm going to be asking you today. So excuse me if you see me reading off the screen, really read the questions. I'm not, I'm not trying to be distracted, but yeah, I'm very excited to ask you these questions. So to start off, can you give us a brief overview of what BECU's Black Community Development Project is?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And again, happy to be part of this really important conversation. So the Black Community Development Project was recently announced around the commitment of $5 million over 5 years, and specifically to support Black communities in the state of Washington. And in many ways, it's really the first step in what's going to be seen as a much larger effort to invest in programs that support Black, Indigenous, and people of color or BIPOC communities. And through this project, we're going to partner with a number of grassroots nonprofits and organizations, many of which are focused on anything from overall emotional, physical, and financial health and well-being.
Mhm.
And even more so, we're looking at organizations that are led by and stewarded by Black leaders that either are part of the staff and leadership proper, or boards and other key communities that support these organizations. And we find that to be really important because many of those leaders have that direct lived experience in the Black community and can apply that thinking and that perspective in ways that serve them. And so we'll also be looking at some broader focus areas around education, housing affordability, and workforce development, but again, all in the tenets with supporting current and future programming for BIPOC communities.
Cool. All right. And can you go into what was this commitment inspired by for BECU?
Yeah, so, you know, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that it's been a really complex and interesting year.
Mm.
And particularly when you think about this intersection of race and racial injustice, there's really been a reckoning locally and nationally, kind of a narrative that's shifted around kind of what needs to happen to give Black people and Black communities agency. And so this
Mhm.
project was, in a time where we had seen, kind of this ongoing visual, kind of horrific events around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor
Mhm.
and others. The list is long, that kind of objectified and brutalized Black bodies,
Yeah.
and just kind of continue to steward this issue around police reform and police brutality. And so I think for us, we just felt like we were in a place where when we think about our purpose, we needed to be responsive
Yeah.
because many of our members obviously identify in the Black community. And we had employees who were speaking up and saying, look, now more than ever, like this is the time to really think about what's central to our purpose and do that in ways that are responsive and investing. And so we partnered with a group, which is one of our employee connection groups
Yeah.
called the Black Alliance Cooperative. And they have that lived experience and unique perspective. And so
Yeah.
in witnessing many of the horrific events, they really helped us think about what a demonstrated commitment to racial equity might look like,
Yeah.
not only for employees, but for members and communities, and think about how we kind of take a lens to support nonprofits and
Yeah.
provide kind of equitable access to more marginalized communities. But, again, it just was something that um, we needed to do, and many organizations like us are doing, and I
Yeah.
think will create a much stronger ripple effect for how we think about our work and philanthropy moving forward.
Yeah. No, that's very, very important because systemic racism is embedded in every aspect of our society. So, and approaching that from that financial wellness
Yeah,
standpoint is important because that affects our community tremendously. So I'm glad that these conversations are happening because they're very important for our community.
And Rebecca, if I could, I didn't mean to cut you off, but one thing I should have said,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily connected to this specific cause, but I think, there is recognition there is a growing wealth gap, um,
Mhm.
and that gap exists pretty predominantly amongst race.
Yeah.
And so when you look at Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities,
Yeah.
by far, their ability to gain and maintain wealth is much different than kind of mainstream white communities,
Yeah.
and our members. And we also find that access to housing affordability, and the ability to just carry savings and have access to credit is an issue. And so again, I think it's intricately connected to the fabric of what we need to do as a credit union, and the work around this particular commitment.
Absolutely. So we talked about some of the nonprofits that you partner with. So how are these nonprofits being selected? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so it's a process of learning. We don't have it all figured out, but again, by leaning on folks who have lived experience in the community and really listening to what's been happening externally, I think we learned that there was just a good way to kind of, again, leverage some of our Black employees, leverage some of our nonprofit partners who were doing this work as well, and really kind of using their perspective to come with a strong stance. And without getting in all the weeds and kind of intricacies of it, creating a really deliberate, accept applications, review, really get a good sense of what these nonprofits were doing and kind of dealing with. And to some respects, like not just looking at the usual suspects, the big multi-million dollar nonprofit organizations that have ample funding every year. It's
Mhm.
really looking at some of these smaller nonprofit organizations that might have less than $1 million in their budget, that may not have a robust staff and board, and really thinking about from a capacity building standpoint, how can we be responsive to them now? Because they have not only in this time of racial reckoning, but in this time of COVID, been struggling the most. And so really kind of using that as a lens by which that we awarded these dollars and partnered with these organizations.
Okay. Um, and then I'm also interested, this is more of a personal question.
Okay.
What inspires you about the work that your team is doing at BECU?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of it is it's rooted in two things. Like, I'm from the Seattle area, grew
Mhm.
up in Seattle public schools, have kids in Seattle public schools, um, and so have just had a strong attachment to wanting to be engaged in community and centering community in my work,
Mhm.
um, whether it was working directly for a nonprofit organization or now being, having lots of privilege on this side, working for an organization that can give dollars.
Mhm.
Um, and so even when you think about a lot of the nonprofits that work with like Northwest Tap Connection and Horn of Africa, like have just existing relationships in those spaces. But
Mhm.
when it comes to the team specifically, I just see them as folks who are really bought into the purpose, this idea of like really creating financial well-being for members and communities. Many of them themselves are people of color. And so I think have been personally impacted by some of the issues that we just spoke of.
Mhm.
And I think more so, like, just are committed to this idea of not just, um, doing something for sake of reputational value or doing something because it feels good, but really investing in community for the sake of real change and impact.
Yeah.
And when I think about the conversations that we have every day, um, they want to see dramatic change, not just for individual members and communities, but really within the system.
Yeah.
And think about how we can be one actor in breaking down systems of injustice. And
Yeah.
so that, I mean, when you're getting around people who are smarter than me most of the time, who can do that work, I mean, that is truly inspiring and I think gets me up every day and allows me to bring my best authentic self to the table to be a good coach and supporter and advocate for them.
Yeah. Cool. That sounds like a cool job to have.
it's pretty it's pretty fun. I mean, it has its days, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, it sounds like fulfilling work. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, I'm happy for you. So we talked about systemic racism and some of the ways that you're addressing systemic racism within BECU. Are there other ways that you have been addressing this issue that
Mm,
we haven't talked about?
mm. Well, I mean, the community lens is one side of it, as you mentioned, and I think as an organization, and not just BECU, but all of us really owe it to ourselves to make a committed stance. And so we are, in many ways, looking at all aspects of our work and all aspects of our commitment to members and communities. And so, um, for members and employees, they may have seen some early messaging from our CEO Benson Porter this summer
Mhm.
that really framed some of our early thinking around standing against bias and racism,
Mhm.
standing against issues of oppression, and thinking about that not just in our philanthropy, but in the way that we go about providing products and services, and the ways that we go about recruiting and retaining and developing talent,
Yeah.
even down to just thinking about who is truly represented when it comes to our executive management team, when it comes to our board, because
Oh
like
yeah.
many organizations,
Yep.
those folks are not typically people of color.
Mhm.
And folks don't always maybe have an access point or entree to actually get in those kinds of roles. So how do we develop talent in ways that truly represent the masses of folks that we're serving?
Yeah.
Because if you were to look at our membership and probably even look at our frontline staff who are in our neighborhood financial centers, it's incredibly diverse.
Mhm.
But the more that you grow up the ladder, the less people you might see like me,
Mhm.
leading and driving the organization. And so that's a real thing that we've committed to talk about, and it's not perfect. We are definitely on a journey. And I think definitely, um, working through some discomforts and new learnings for people, but it's the right thing to do, which is really centered around our purpose. The other thing that I would just say tactically and kind of operationally is that we need a leader who can hold this container for the strategy. And so we've been very fortunate to bring on someone like Dr. Jackie Martinez Vasquez, who I've known for a number of years, to be our new VP of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And without spilling all the kind of stealing her thunder, she's
Mhm.
got some really exciting stuff coming. And we've also been fortunate to recruit Fumbi Chima from, I think most recently, Adidas, who is our new chief information officer, and just has a huge breadth of knowledge and expertise in the financial sector and the retail sector,
Yeah.
which I think will take us to the next level. And she is also a Black woman and woman of color.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make these larger commitments. And again, it will take time. It's not going to be overnight. It's definitely a long-term play, but I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction and that our leadership is
Yeah.
committed to that kind of change.
Yeah. And I mean, those are very important things because representation matters. And there's a lot of organizations that need to commit to a lot of those changes because it is important to see, an array of people, a range of people in positions, in leadership positions and positions of power. So
Right.
that's good. I'm happy to see the changes be implemented. I look forward to seeing more. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to say before we conclude our quick Q&A here.
Well, so a couple of things. One, again, it's a true pleasure to sit here and talk to you about this, because I mean, also as you being a BECU member, it's just important to know that this is meaningful to you and
Yeah,
the right kind of thing to do. We want to make sure that we're representing our members well in this work.
yeah, yeah,
But again, I'm just, I think I'm going to stress that um, these issues that we're wrestling with have been generational curses. And as an organization, I think, again, we're one actor in trying to figure out how to break down some of these issues.
mhm,
But I'm really encouraged by the direction we're going in. And I just would really kind of implore our members to come along this ride with us,
yeah,
because this is also they're part of the solution. And so I just really encourage them to be supportive, excited, and hopeful for the kind of impacts that we can have on our community,
yeah.
and specifically in the communities that they live, work, and thrive in. So thank you for this opportunity to share what we're
Yeah,
doing.
thank you for taking the time and for having this conversation. That's important. I, as a member, want to invest in spaces that I feel like care about the community that I live in and care for me as a person. So it feels good to be valued like that. I commend you for the work that you do, and I'm excited to see a lot of changes implemented. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, good seeing you too.
Take care.